So in June, when you were running to be Prime Minister, you said no deal is not a policy option available to the next Prime Minister. The real choice is between leaving with a deal or no Brexit. Is that your view?
Well, I think that I've said before that I think that that I was surprised after saying that by the Parliament not voting in the summer to prevent no deal. But clearly, Parliament has made its view clear in the Benn Act that was passed at the start of this month. I think that the best way to leave is with a deal. Absolutely, I've always thought that. But we've got to get Brexit done so that we can get on to delivering on all the other things, like the NHS, which I'm responsible for, like on schools and the extra 20,000 police.
So is your view then that I can tell that you think leaving with a deal is the best option, yes. But what's the choice? Is it between leaving without a deal and not leaving at all? Well, or is no deal, do you think, realistically on the table?
We've got to get Brexit done. I think, yeah, absolutely no deal may well happen.
So you've changed your mind then?
Yes, I have, and I said that a few weeks ago. I absolutely think we have got to get Brexit done. I made that, that's the other argument I was making when I was running. We've got to get Brexit done so that you can then get on to all of the other things. You know, the public is deeply frustrated with all these rows about Brexit, all the noise in politics at the moment, and all of the language. Let's get Brexit done, because then we can get on to things like the NHS, which unite people rather than divide them.
You mentioned the Benn Act. This, of course, is the move by MPs to try and compel the Prime Minister to extend if he can't get a deal rather than leave with no deal. Do you think there's loopholes on that, or do you think the Prime Minister will have to obey the Benn Act if he can't get a deal?
Well, clearly the Prime Minister and the government will obey the law, but we've got to get Brexit done.
So what does obeying the law mean? Does that mean asking for an extension if he can't get a deal?
Well, the best way through all of this, Sophie, is to get a deal.
Yeah, I know that's what you think.
And that's what we should be, that's what we are working towards.
But what if we can't?
Well, we've still got to get Brexit done as a country, right? There are people out there who say, let's have a second referendum. But that doesn't solve Brexit at all. That would just prolong the row for even longer. And there's people who say now, people who just say, we'll just revote. Well, that wouldn't solve this political row about Brexit in this country at all. We're a democracy. Okay. And in a democracy, when the people vote, whether you agreed with them or not, you follow the result. And they voted to leave. And so people like me, who voted Remain in that referendum, we should listen to the result, we should act on the result, and let's get this done, and then we can move forward.
You talk about living in a democracy. We're a parliamentary democracy, of course, and during that campaign you also said to suspend Parliament explicitly to pursue a course of action against its wishes is not a serious policy of a Prime Minister in the 21st century. It undermines parliamentary democracy. It goes against everything that those men who waded onto those beaches fought and died for. I mean, I'm not dredging up quotes from the distant past here. This is things you said a couple of months ago.
And this proposal at the time was to prorogue, suspend Parliament all the way through to the 1st of November. And
the Supreme Court stand against you.
Well, instead, Parliament sat for the first 2 weeks in September. It passed a law during that time. So Parliament has been able to express its view. It's sitting next week, even whilst Conservative Party conference is on.
Because the Supreme Court ordered it to sit again. It's not because the Prime Minister
Parliament's come back. The back end of last week, and it'll be there this week. Last week, it sat for 2 days after the Supreme Court quashed the prorogation decision. We only had one vote on one thing, which was whether to have a recess this week. There were no votes on substantive issues, there's a reason for that, and that is that the moment to get a deal, to deliver Brexit with a deal, is the European Council on the 17th of October. Until then, we don't have a new proposal to have a vote on in Parliament. We've had hundreds and hundreds of hours of debate in Parliament.
Let's talk about some of the things. Let's talk about some of the things that Parliament did talk about in that time when it was recalled, because there was some very passionate debate about abuse, about MPs feeling worried for their safety. Paul Sheriff, Labour MP, said, "We stand here under the shield of our departed friend, Joe Cox. Many of us in this place are subject to death threats and abuse every single day. Let me tell the Prime Minister," they often quote his words. The Prime Minister replied, "Humbug." Is it humbug?
Well, you're actually only partly quoting it, so it's a bit unreasonable, Sophie.
What else? What else should I have put in?
Well, you should have the final sentence.
Okay,
of the question.
so let me tell the Prime Minister that they also quote his words: "Surrender act, betrayal, traitor." Is that the bit you mean?
Yes, because look. I think it's totally reasonable to call the Ben Act a surrender act, the surrender act, right? And that's because that literally describes
Is it humbug,
what it
though?
does.
Is it humbug?
Well, the
that's
Prime Minister
very dismissive, isn't it?
The Prime Minister there was referring to calling the Ben Act the Surrender Act. He thinks that's perfectly reasonable. I think it's perfectly reasonable, and that is and that's the debate that was going on in the Commons at the time. I wasn't actually there for that exchange, but it is reasonable to call this act that makes it so much harder for the Prime Minister to negotiate.
I understand the what you're saying, defending those words, but there is a wider concern, isn't there? I mean, Jo Swinson has had to report threats to her children to the police this week. Jess Phillips has seen someone trying to smash a window in her office. Yvette Cooper's daughter has come out saying that she's scared every single day because they have an explosive bag to catch the mail at their family home. And the Prime Minister stands there and says humbug.
No, he was referring to something else. But
it sounds dismissive, doesn't it?
He was referring to something else. And
are you dancing on the head of a pin here?
No, I'm not, because it's incredibly important that we have a high-quality public discourse. I care deeply about that. I've always tried personally, in public life, to use reasonable language and to make the argument rather than just use the rhetoric. All of us get overexcited from time to time, but that has always been my approach, and I think you'd agree with that. The challenge is, how do you make sure that on all sides some of this aggressive language is de-escalated? As in a way, as Conservatives, we have you grow up with having this sort of language thrown at you from the other side, and that doesn't excuse it on any side, by the way. But when you have some of the stuff that John McDonnell has said in particular, and I single him out because he is the most aggressive.
I don't want to get into an argument here about who is worse. I just think it's a bit of a race to the bottom.
No, absolutely. If you just let me finish, because that is exactly the point that I wanted to make, right? Is that I think it's incumbent on all sides. Mm-hmm. It's incumbent on all sides. But it is frustrating to hear some of the accusations, obviously, from the other side. But it's incumbent on everybody to have positive language.